something that is, I think, really, if you can and if you have a desire to, really important right now. Is Michael on?
Yes. Michael is here.
Michael Bauer. Let's give a round of applause for him. So Michael is someone that I deeply admire. I have read many, many books, and you can see if you look at my bookshelf, I've read a lot of books about Israel. I've had a lot of conversations. I've challenged myself many times over the years. And when I was in Israel, guided by Michael, I have never met someone or interacted with or learned from someone who is so balanced, critical, honest, who is closely connected to Palestinian communities and families, who understands the geopolitical dynamic in a way. I had just never heard anybody speak to it in such a clear and concise way and without any bullshit. Like, he tells you what it is, and he will say, Palestinians feel like this, and they have every right to feel that way. Jews feel like this, and they have every right to feel that way. The problem is, what is the way forward? And so, Michael, thank you for getting up at this very early hour and joining us. We have, I don't know, very full house. You can't even see all the way, it's full all the way back over here. This is, and I hope everybody can hear well. But I sent you all a background on Michael, and I don't want to delay any more. I want to introduce him and have him share more on the situation. So tonight's theme is the history of Israel and what's happening and sort of how we got to where we are right now. And so he'll speak and share. Do you want us to let you share your screen, or are you just going to speak?
I'll speak, and I'll be using the screen and later on.
Okay, so we'll share a screen. So we'll make sure you can share. Oh no.
Yeah, hold on. We're fixing the audio.
Hang on, let's.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. So,
No, we're good. Michael, can you speak real fast? Just that. Can you say anything?
Right now, I can't share a screen. You can see.
and then we'll let you share a screen. We just want to make sure that the volume was up. So I'm going to pass it over to you. Thank you, Michael. Go ahead.
Oh, do I have to? 1 sec. Sorry, Michael.
Hi, good evening. Are we good to go, Cora?
Yeah, you can.
Okay, in the meantime, I can't share a screen, but oh, here I can. Okay. So good evening, everyone, or actually here it's good morning. Thank you, Cora. Happy to see all of you, although I'd be happy to see you in live and not through Zoom. I'll start and I'll just share where I'm speaking from, and then we'll go through a certain chronology of events. So I live here in a kibbutz, which is a small village in the south of Israel, not too far from the Gaza Strip. In fact, just in front of me, there is a big window, which we are living on a little hill, and I can see all the way to the shore, to the area of Gaza and the area all around it. On the other side, about 2 miles to my back, we are near what's called the West Bank. So in addition to the fact that I'm going to present to you an intellectual chronology of events, I am fully engaged physically with the situation. On October 7th, when Hamas entered and attacked the region, they did not arrive all the way to our kibbutz. They were stopped probably because they arrived to a certain party where they were able to kill 300 people. That also slowed them down and prevented them from arriving all the way to our kibbutz. Ever since, we are preparing ourselves for an attack of that sort. On October 7th, 3,000 terrorists entered Israel, killing over 1,200 people, kidnapping over 200 people, using brutality which is beyond believable. I know that part of the brutality that was performed, in addition to the numbers, and remember, we are a small country, so 1,200 for us, a country of less than 10 million people, means that we don't have one family in Israel that doesn't know one person that was killed, kidnapped, or affected by attack. But the brutality that took place, and I won't go into details, but rape and more did create a psyche over here where Israelis, if you know Israelis, if you've been to Israel, we're not the same any longer. We have completely changed on many, many levels. And I'll talk to that also just a bit, because psychology is a big part of the story. And following October 7th, Israel entered into Gaza with the hope to remove Hamas. I'll be explaining why that is extremely complicated and difficult. And we are in a war that has been going on. In fact, until yesterday, we had for almost a week a ceasefire, which was held. And in exchange, we received some hostages that arrived back. And also we were releasing some other terrorists. The reason why I'm saying terrorists is because it's people that were actually involved in terror attacks, people that stabbed, people that attacked, and people were released in exchange to our hostages. And yesterday, the war actually started again. A lot of missiles here in the area, on the shore, and Israel's ground operation started again. I'm assuming that people that are sitting here in Zoom or in live have heard about the event since October 7th. I want to provide a bit of context. And what we'll do, by the way, I'll speak for a while. Those of you who want to ask questions as I'm speaking, feel free to share on the chat or the Q&A, which I don't see that box right now, but I'm assuming that it's somewhere over here. And if you want, at some point I'll stop, and if you want to open the mic and ask, and I will just say, you can ask whatever you want. I've been speaking about the topic quite a lot. Any question can be asked. So I want to start, first of all, explaining a bit about what is Gaza, what are the people of Gaza. I'll go briefly through the chronology, and then I want to explain what Hamas is and the connection to Iran, Hezbollah, and even Yemen, since we did have several missiles arriving over here all the way down south from Yemen. So I will just open the map. And generally, hoping that you can see a map right now, you'll see in the small little square the state of Israel. Just to remind you, we're a small country as big as New Jersey. If I'm not mistaken, Montana is 10 times bigger from the all of the country. And in the southwest, we have that narrow strip called the Gaza Strip. It is about 25 miles long. Today are living there about 2.2 million Palestinians in a very narrow strip. And in fact, historically, there was no such thing as a strip. There was a city called Gaza, which has a lot of history, located in that southern western part of the country. So what actually is that strip? So as I mentioned, in the past, we had a city, and there was a few villages and towns. To give you an idea of numbers, prior to 1948, on all of that strip, where today you have 2.2 million people, you had about 100,000 people prior to 48. In 1948, we had a war over here. Cora mentioned it briefly. We call it the War of Independence. Our Arab Palestinian neighbors call it Nakba, which means destruction or disaster. And as an outcome of that war, there was a lot of movement of populations. Also, Jews that lived in areas that were taken by Jordan, for example, had to flee and move into what became Israel. And not all, but many Palestinians that found themselves under what became Israel had to flee to areas that were Egypt or Jordan or into Syria or Lebanon. And when we're talking about the Gaza Strip, about 200,000 actually moved south to that strip, which was occupied by Egypt in that war. Meaning prior to 1948, that strip as part of that land was under a British mandate, before that an Ottoman Empire. And generally, when we're talking about the story or history of the region, we're not talking about a history of states at all. Not an Israeli state and not a Palestinian state. We're talking about a story about people with different identities, which are controlled by big empires. British, Ottoman, Mamluk, Crusade, and I'm already 1,000 years back. So In 1948, that strip is occupied by Egypt. Now, I'm saying the word occupied because Egypt took it over, but never annexed that territory, never provided the Palestinians that were living there or that arrived there as an outcome of that war any citizenship, didn't even allow them to immigrate into Egypt, and vice versa. The Palestinians in that strip didn't identify as Egyptians. So that, even though occupied by Egypt in 48, never really became Egypt. And in those years for Israel, between 48 and 1967, that strip was challenging in the sense that it was actually part of Egypt. And when we defined our enemies, we defined them as an Egyptian enemy sitting in that area. And there's Gazan people, Palestinian people, but it was an Egyptian front. And the next date is 1967. I'll open again a quick map so that you can see the outcome of that war. So to the right, you will see in blue this land. We call it Land of Israel. Palestinians call it Land of Palestine. And this was controlled by the British Mandate. In the middle, you'll see that in 1967, there was a 6-day war. I will just say, I won't go into it right now, but anyone that wants to understand Israel should go and check and learn what happened in the 6-day war. Why did it actually happen? And a lot of our politics today are an outcome of that 6-day war in 1967. But as you can see in that middle map, the Jordanians actually crossed the Jordan River in 1948 and take over the West Bank of the Jordan River, and the Egyptians control that southern western piece. In 67, on the left map, Israel takes over the West Bank and takes over the Sinai Desert with that Gaza Strip. So in 1967, we actually take over the Gaza Strip as part of Sinai, and we control that area. And once again, we, like the Egyptians, we do not annex that area, which means that similar to the way that Gazans did not become Egyptian, Gazans also did not become Israeli in 1967. They stayed Palestinians in an area which is controlled now by Israel, but not annexed. The next, can you hear me well? I see the picture moving a bit. All good? Fantastic. I know that you're not too far from Canada. I work a lot with Canadians, and Canadians are so polite. Sometimes they speak, they don't hear me, and they're too polite to tell me that they can't hear me. So please let me know if it's not clear. So we are talking about 1967. Israel takes over that area and doesn't annex it. The next date, I'm moving fast, and then later on you need to go slowly and go through those events, but I want to get to our days. In 1979, we signed a peace agreement with Egypt. We give back that big Sinai Desert. We offer the Egyptians, take the Gaza. The Egyptians say, wisely, from their point of view, no way. We will take the Sinai Desert, which was ours. We are not taking the Gaza Strip, since it was not Egypt. We occupied it in 48, but we didn't annex it. We don't see it as Egypt. Now, Egypt didn't want to take it. And I'll say something, when you sit far away in Montana, we look the same over here, but we are not. Also, Arab and Palestinian people in general are not the same people. There's a lot of differences. Like Jews, we are not all the same. Like, people are different. Egyptian, even dialect, is different than Palestinian one. The Palestinian people were not interested ever to be part of Egypt. Egypt did not want to be in charge of a region which is politically charged. Palestinians have an agenda, a desire to have a Palestine, not to be part of Egypt. And therefore, if they would take over Gaza and annex it, they would be in charge of an additional 2 million poor people. And they themselves, with a population of over 100 million people, where 2 million poor people are born every single year, were not interested in being involved with 2 million additional people. Not only that, politically charged with the desire of having a Palestine. And therefore, if Egypt would control Gaza, they would be considered the occupier. Better Israel be the occupier. And therefore, Israel was left in charge of that strip ever since and never annexed it. And the years go by, people from Gaza can work in Israel. We can go into the Gaza Strip. There's no fence. There's times of tension, times of, calm days. And the next big day that I want to mention is 1987, where the Palestinians start what's known as Intifada, an uprising, which changes the psyche and conversation over here. If we were talking all the time about an Israeli-Arab, Israel and its neighbors conflict, we are moving into an Israeli-Palestinian, whether you want to call it a conflict or a conversation, where we are negotiating and talking about those territories with the Palestinians and not with the Arab countries with whom we were actually in conflict. So in the 90s, we are starting a series, an era of negotiations called Oslo, which were supposed to end with a Palestinian state, and the borders should have been negotiated. The years went by and we never, as you know, there's no Palestinian state, and we also didn't achieve any peace. But generally the idea that we will pull out of Gaza, we'll pull out of parts of the West Bank, there were talks about a division of Jerusalem, there were a lot of talks of division in order to create a two-state solution. Well, that did not happen. And after that did not happen, for 7 years of negotiation, in the year 2000, the American administration led by Clinton put an offer on the table, which was a take it or leave it proposal. It's called the Clinton parameters. The year is 2000 now. And generally proposed that Israel will pull out of Gaza completely. When I'm saying Gaza, I'm talking about that strip, which by then already Israel had approximately 8,000 Jews living over there, which settled there in the late 70s. And then there was also talks about Israel will pull out of the West Bank. Most of it, 96% of it, will do a swap and offer 4% in other places. We'll divide Jerusalem, and a whole list of details. That did not happen, and was actually rejected by, at the time, the Palestinian leader called Yasser Arafat. And it's interesting as for why. I won't get into it right now. He understood the offer very differently than the way I presented it. I'll say that in a nutshell. The Americans offered from the West Bank and the Gaza Strip that Israel will provide them with 96% plus 4 and a division of Jerusalem. Generally in business, people know that when you're offered 96% plus 4, that equals 100, which is considered a good deal. And Israelis thought that is a very generous, also the Americans, saw that a very generous offer towards the Palestinians. The Palestinians understood it differently. And I'm allowing myself to speak in the name of Palestinians right now, as I used to, until the war, until 2 months ago, spend a lot of time in the West Bank, including with very senior positions, Palestinian Prime Minister Mohammed Ashtaya, and he himself, in answering a question of why did you reject the 2000, says the following: Israelis consider the West Bank and the Gaza Strip as 100% of the deal. Palestine is the Jordan River to the Mediterranean, he said. The West Bank and the Gaza Strip is 22% of that land. No one offers 22% and expects anyone to compromise over 22%. When he explained that, I understood that we and the Palestinians, we Israelis and the Palestinians, it's not that we never agreed on an end of the negotiations. We never even agreed on the beginning language of the conversation. We count everything differently. We speak 2 different languages. By the way, the languages are similar, but the narrative is parallel. So when we look at the Gaza Strip and the West Bank as 100% of what should be a Palestinian state, that assuming you believe in a 2-state solution, which not everyone does. There's camps in Israel. There's a camp that believes that that should have happened. There's a camp that thinks that that should not have happened. You can't trust, and so on and so forth, or because of biblical, historical reasons, and so on. But among the camp that believed in a 2-state solution, let's call them the doves of the left in Israel, that was a calculation of 100%. Palestinians calculate that as 22%, and therefore you cannot negotiate over that. And as you probably know, we never reached a 2-state solution or peace. And following that offer in 2001, 2, 3, and 4, there was a very deadly, multiple deadly attacks following by Israeli responses. Obviously, a Palestinian will describe that exactly in the opposite direction: Israeli attacks and Palestinian responses. But we're looking at a violent era. That era also changed the psyche and the political structure in Israel. Because Israelis, until this day, we are divided between right and left. But what right and what left is, that changes every once in a while. What does it actually mean to be right and left in Israel? By the way, as I'm speaking to you right now, right and left is changing. What does it actually mean to be a left wing in Israel today following October 7th? There will be left, but we will define left differently. In 2001, 2, 3, 4, the structure changes as following. The classic right in Israel that say, no two-state solution, stay strong, they will come to us on our terms, no compromise, and a whole list of other different ideas. I bet it lost its case because there was so much violence. The classic left, which said land for peace, also lost its case because we just offered 96% plus 4 and it was rejected. So that went off the table. Now, an annexation of the West Bank and the Gaza Strip was never an option. But if you annex an area, you need to provide people with full citizenship. And at the time, the fear was that if everyone is under Israel between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean, meaning we annex the West Bank and its people, eventually there will be a potential majority of Palestinians between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean, and then Israel is either not a Jewish state or not a democracy, which for Israelis, both of them were important. So annexation is not an option. Two-state solution was not an option. Status quo was not an option. What the hell do you do? And that was a bit of a collapse where a lot of people just lost, what is the plan? What do you do tomorrow morning? And that created quite a big center. Or there was theoretical left, theoretical right, but when it comes to what do you do tomorrow morning, people were quite united. You try and manage the conflict in some ways, and the discussions were quite tactical and not strategic. And in 2005, a prime minister called Ariel Sharon comes with a new idea, which looked refreshing and creative at the time. It was called the unilateral disengagement. He pretty much said, you know what, it is so complicated, let's put the West Bank aside. Biblical and historical and heritage sites, a lot of people, both Palestinians, also Jewish, let's put it aside. Let's deal with the Gaza Strip. Only 8,000 Jews are living over there, no strategic value, quite small. By the way, I'm just reminding you the direction. It's not America. When I'm talking about that area, I'm talking about 1 hour away from Tel Aviv, 20-minute drive from where I'm sitting right now. The whole country is small. I can drive 20 minutes, I'm in the Gaza Strip, which is the western part of Israel, and I can drive 5 minutes east, and I'm in the West Bank. I mean, we're a very small space. But the idea in 2005 that Israel will pull out, and we did. And all polls showed that majority of Israelis were in favor of pulling out of Gaza. When I'm saying most people in Israel, we are very much divided and opinionated. It can be a 51%, a 55%, a 60%, never 80, never 90%, but still, it's a democracy. Once you have a majority, things happen. Maybe that's too easy, but things tend to happen. And we pulled out in 2005. Once that happened, that same prime minister actually got a coma and was replaced by another prime minister called Olmert, which went to election and said, I'm going to continue disengaging from the West Bank as I did in the Gaza Strip, starting from north to south, according to our own interest, since we don't have a partner. And he was elected. So we have an indicator that by 2006, majority of Israelis, not everyone, but majority of Israelis are in favor of pulling out of areas. But then happened the following. We had up to 2005, from 2001, missiles, mortars falling on our area, which was about 3 to 7 miles around the Gaza Strip. Very narrow strip. And once we pulled out in 2005, the number of those missiles and mortars doubled and tripled. So what happened to the Israeli public? The Israeli public made a quick calculation and said, wait a minute, we were in favor of pulling out of the Gaza Strip, but now the amount of missiles on that parameter around have grown. If we pull out of the West Bank, same parameter will include Tel Aviv and big cities and Jerusalem International Airport, we cannot actually move forward with what many of us think that ideologically is right. So now you're stuck again. Also, the disengagement doesn't work. I mean, it happened, but you can't expand it. So what do? Following that, in 2006, America and Israel, and I'll say that with a bit of criticism, came up to the Palestinians and said, Palestinians, you need democracy. You don't have a state, but you need democracy. If you think about it, by the way, it's very easy today to sit and criticize it many years later. It's not that we were a lot smarter at the time. But think about it. What did we say? There's countries in the Middle East have states and don't have a democracy. Palestinians will have a democracy without a state. It doesn't make a lot of sense, but it made sense at the time. And they went for elections. And who won? A movement, which is also a terror organization and also a movement and also a state of mind, known as Hamas, won 42% of the seats of the Palestinian parliament. They have a parliament, again, there's no state, but there's a model called the Palestinian Authority, which is functioning as a government in order for being a government if there would be a Palestinian state. So they won actually over the parliament. Now, 42% is not a majority, but no one had more than that. It was the strongest power in that parliament. And the head of the Palestinian Authority, a man called Mahmoud Abbas, you know him, either Mahmoud Abbas or Abu Mazen is the same person, also understood that he can't operate with a Hamas-led parliament, and he didn't hand over the rights and the power that they should have received, and prevented them from representing Palestinians internationally, and so on and so forth. In many ways, what Israel, America, and the Palestinian Authority actually said was, oh, we believed in democracy, but you just chose the wrong party. We never meant that that will be the case. So also America and Israel said, well, once you chose the wrong party, we can't work with you. Because Hamas actually calls to a Palestinian state, which will be an Islamic state according to the Sharia and the Quran between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean. A guy like me, which is Jewish, doesn't have a place in that place. So what exactly are we supposed to negotiate? So that was quite like a shocking moment in the region over here. And a year later, in 2007, moving into 2008, Hamas, which had its own militias, might, by force, took over the Gaza Strip. Now, in the West, we described it as, by the way, I do speak both languages of Hebrew and Arabic. And those are two different languages, not only a language, but a state of mind. And in 2008, I remember everyone saying, oh, Hamas made a coup. And I was saying, which coup? They took, from their point of view, they took what they thought is theirs. They just won elections 2 years earlier, never got the rights over what they won. They went and took what they believed was theirs. And they took over the Gaza Strip. By the way, by throwing people from the Fatah, the competing party, off tall buildings, taking leaders, making, call the schools for a break, took all the kids from all the schools to the big square, took the leaders of the Fatah of the other party, tied them behind motorbikes, started driving in circles until they ripped them into pieces. They killed them in the most brutal way that one can imagine. I'm saying that because when people are saying, wow, the brutality of October 7th, I'm saying, if you would know what's happening, the inner brutality that was going on, I was not surprised about the brutality that was performed towards us. Yahya Sinwar, the current leader, by the way, when he was in prison, he beheaded another prisoner that was with him on the sink in his cell because he thought that he was collaborating with Israel. So we're talking about serious brutality, and I'm soft in the story that I'm sharing. Hamas took over in 2008. From that moment over, Israel was a bit of a dilemma. Okay, how do you manage? What do you do? What do you do now that you've got an area controlled by a body, which is a terror organization that by definition calls for your destruction? Hamas is, in Arabic, Harakat al-Mukawwama al-Islamiyya, the movement of the Islamic resistance. And Israel said, well, we can't work with Hamas. Let's do a siege. With them we don't work. We'll work only with the West Bank. And the idea of the siege was that people will see that it's not worthwhile having Hamas in power. So if there'll be election, they'll elect someone differently, or they'll make a coup, and they'll be able to see Ramallah in the West Bank, which actually looks fine with an economy and see Gaza, which will be poor. That was the logic of 2008, 9, 10. And the years go by. When I'm saying a blockade, first of all, it's not only Israel's blockade. Egypt had a blockade also. Gaza has a border with Egypt, not only with us. And at the same time, there was not a full blockade. There was electricity that we were providing, water that we were providing, food inside, going in, out. But it created a very harsh, challenging economy, which led to a lot of poverty within the Gaza Strip. Not as poor, by the way, as some neighborhoods in Cairo or in other parts, but poor. The years go by, and Israel is challenged of what to do. The blockade isn't working. A, because there's no election for the people to make a choice. Hamas is such an efficient brutal regime. Anyone that tried to say anything against it was murdered in the most brutal ways, and they're staying in power. Every once in a while, you want me to slow down a minute? I see there's a question, Cora.
I'm sorry. I don't know if you could hear us. I was just asking if you could describe siege, which I think you did, which is basically blockade, right? The siege
I don't think you can.
of Gaza. Can you hear us?
Yes, to describe the blockade.
Just describe, when you say siege, do you mean the blockade?
Yes. Yes.
Got it.
I'll just show you a minute. If you take a look at the map, you see that we have the parameter in the south, in the north, and in the east. The south is actually a border with Egypt, and then there's the Mediterranean. So first of all, the blockade is from an Israeli side. The Egyptians also, by the way, Egyptians were concerned with Hamas. Hamas is an offshoot of an organization called Islamic Brotherhood, which is the illegal opposition of Egypt, and therefore Egypt most of the time actually joined in the blockade, also trying to remove Hamas from power. The years go by, we had a few rounds of violence, 2014 and 2018. And every time also reacting in violence didn't help. Every time Hamas was up again and again, there were missiles and there were those. And then about 2 years ago, Israel changed the conception, saying if that, what you call it blockade or siege, doesn't work, and every time there's this rounds of violence doesn't work, doesn't change, why don't we try and pragmaticize Hamas? We'll actually work with them. We'll allow money to go in. It was Qatari money. We'll provide jobs. And in fact, in the last 2 years, we started seeing a growing number of Palestinians from Gaza starting to work in Israel, factories of textile being built in Gaza. And the psyche was, okay, if that is changing, it seems like Hamas is becoming pragmatic in Gaza and will remove its violent activity to the West Bank, to Lebanon, to other places. And therefore, you can actually also remove some forces. It seemed like from Gaza, nothing is going to happen, which is part of what we call the concept. Now, I'll say something about Hamas in order to understand who are they. There was an organization in Egypt that started in 1928 called Islamic Brotherhood. I suggest people Google Islamic Brotherhood and understand it, because through that you'll understand Turkey, Qatar, Al Jazeera, which is, I don't know if Qatar is a country that has a TV channel called Al Jazeera, or Al Jazeera is a TV channel that has a country called Qatar. And you understand a lot of issues of the Middle East. Islamic Brotherhood originally was a non-violent body which was supposed to increase political Islam, religion within the Arab Muslim world. Ever since it expanded, and today there is, first of all, a lot of violent offshoots that broke out of Islamic Brotherhood, and also you have activities of Islamic Brotherhood in London, in Europe, in Maryland, in America, and other places. But Hamas in the 80s was actually an offshoot, was an organ broke out of Islamic Brotherhood. And as I said, it's a movement of the Islamic resistance, the resistance toward Israel. At first, representing religious Palestinians, and slowly becoming a very efficient terror organization, launching countless terror attacks on Israel. And became very, very popular, extremely popular. Still today, we'll need to see new polls, but wins elections in the West Bank, in Gaza, and in East Jerusalem. Anyhow, when they started as an organization or a movement, it is relatively small. In order for them to operate, they do need to have some bigger umbrella, whether it is Iran or something that supports them. Up to 2011, 2012, their headquarters outside of Gaza were in Damascus. But then there was something called the Arab Spring and the civil war in Syria, and they actually had to move. They moved to Egypt because at the time there was an election that allowed the Islamic Brotherhood to win in Egypt, and then there was a coup, and the current president actually threw out the Islamic Brotherhood, and they were a bit lost. And once that was lost, actually they had to receive some support from Qatar. So I have about 5 minutes before we move to Q&A. I want to open kind of like light on Qatar, Iran, and Yemen. One, Qatar. What is the story of Qatar? Qatar, first of all, people need to look into it very, very carefully. It is a country of 350,000 people only. That's the amount of people that are actually Qatari, with a lot of expats, a lot of foreign workers, which is in that Gulf, biggest gas field in the world, and the wealthiest country in the world. And Qatar, in fact, throughout the years, pretty much sponsored anyone that you can imagine in the Middle East. Qatar started to sponsor Hamas and pouring in a lot of money. Parts of it were with permission of Israel, and that was part of the idea of sponsoring Hamas. What did we not understand is that that money was actually going and to underground tunnels, missiles, and a military might, and not necessarily going to hospitals, education, and such. That was, and for the past 2 years, we're seeing a creation of that brilliant, from their point of view, brilliant attack of October 7th. Another player which is important to understand is Iran. Iran calls to the destruction of Israel as part of a rearranging of the Middle East. Iran believes that there should not be any states in the Middle East. You should need to go into what's called a Shiite caliphate empire of the region. That would include, by the way, them controlling big parts of world's energy. And Israel is a country. Israel is a Jewish country, which is considered an anti-Islamic idea. Israel is a Western country from the Iranian point of view. Israel is a powerful country, meaning we can prevent that caliphate, or what's known in the West as searching of regional hegemony. And therefore, you see a lot of efforts of building a militia in Lebanon called Hezbollah, building militias in Syria, in Iraq, and in Yemen, in order to confront Sunni players as Saudi Arabia, for example, Emirates and such, and Israel. And we know that Iran was deeply involved in planning and operating with Hamas towards this attack, and holding a might called Hezbollah in the north, with approximately 150,000 missiles aimed on every single place in Israel, which potentially that could expand. And before I open it to questions, I just want to show you something that people are not paying attention to, and it is Yemen. On the big picture over here, you'll see an organization called the Houthis. Now, in a nutshell, quickly, in Yemen, which is in the south, in a very strategic location, because it's near what's called the Arab Sea. Trade, by the way, 85% of world's trade goes through the seas. Anything that goes out of the Gulf, if you want to call it the Persian Gulf or Arab Gulf, areas of Qatar, so Emirates, or that goes from the east in general, in order to get into the Suez Canal and to Europe and America, goes near Yemen's shores. So Yemen, as a location, has a lot of control over big parts of our world trade. There are Shiite people and Sunni people. I won't go into what it is, but it's two streams or religions within Islam. And since 2015, the Shiite and Sunnis in Yemen are killing one another. The civil war over there, where between 300,000 to 1 million people were already killed over there. I'm assuming that in your campuses, people were not rioting about that, because Israel was not involved. But all along, from 2015, when a Shiite Yemen killed a Sunni Yemen, they were holding a flag, which you can see in the picture over here. And I would like to translate what's written on that flag. It is written in Arabic. It is written, Allahu Akbar, God is great. Al-Mot li-America, death to America. Al-Mot li-Israel, death to Israel. Il-La'na lil-Yahud, curse upon the Jews. Al-Nasr al-Islam, victory to Islam. For the past 8 years, when a Yemenite Muslim Shiite killed a Yemenite Muslim Sunni, the flag was death to America, death to Israel, curse upon the Jews, victory to Islam. And I've been showing that flag for years now, also to Americans. And I was saying, I'm quite surprised you haven't heard about it, because you are actually the first on the list of a powerful organization that is actually controlling an area which potentially has a lot of influence on world trade and world economy. And if you saw the color of that flag, it's not a coincidence. It's the color of the flag of Iran, red, white, and green. And we did see several drones and missiles launched from Yemen as well, as part of that potential increase of regional war, which is me saying that what happened to us here on October 7th, the psyche that I started the story with, the war within Gaza, people in Gaza also are going through terrible days right now. Hundreds of thousands actually had to move from their houses. A lot of people were killed. Most of them were terrorists, but a lot of people were also killed as part of the outcome of that war. It is important to understand what's happening in the ground, but it's important also to look out and see who are the players in the area that are literally playing with us over here on the ground. Questions?
Thank you so much, Michael. And as you can see, he has incredibly deep knowledge about the entire region. And I didn't know that about Yemen. That isn't something that we covered, but or that I really looked into. But you can see, I didn't realize the power that they have over world trade. It's really good to know, because I think people think of Yemen as not that powerful. We think of Iran and sometimes Lebanon, Syria. And also a reminder to Americans, our role in destabilizing and basically occupying Iraq has made Iran much more powerful. I don't know if you agree with me, but we have to also remember our role, not just in Israel, but in the entire region. Like we play a role in all of this that we also have to only take seriously. So I think there are a couple questions in the chat, and then I'm going to hopefully have some here.
I'll answer a few questions in the chat. One of the question over here is asking, in a way, the connection between Gaza Strip, and is it similar to what is happened with indigenous people in America? And I want to just to talk about this, the idea of indigenous. In the conversation, there's a conversation now. Who are the indigenous people of this land over here? And I will start at the end of the story. There's two indigenous people to this land. Palestinians are indigenous, and Jews. Now, if we want to go back and define what indigenous is, so the question is, are we deciding it according to who was here first, or the continuity? There's different ways of trying to describe it. There is no doubt, by the way, that there were Jews over here for thousands of years. Read the Bible. In a few weeks, we're going to celebrate Christmas, which is the birth of Jesus within a Jewish family. So Jews are indigenous to this land over here. I myself was born over here. My language, my culture is completely rooted to the land. It is true that most of us Jews in some point were expelled from the land, lived in different places, and then came back. But the way we understand it, the way we see it, so first of all, most of us were born over here. But even if our parents in some point were living in what we call exile and came back, we do see ourselves culturally rooted to the land as indigenous people. Saying that, Palestinian people are also indigenous people. Now, a lot of them perhaps actually moved over here 150 years ago, 200 years ago. There's a lot of movement in the Middle East. Some are here for thousands of years. You could go into this academic discussion of following every family and a root and trying to see. But what I will say that in our mind and culture and heart, both Palestinians and Israeli Jews completely see ourselves rooted to the land over here, emotionally and culturally. And therefore, it is really a terrible conflict between two indigenous people. And it is true that a lot of people, both Jews, by the way, and Arabs, were displaced from their homes in 1948. The Jews, by the way, from Arab countries and moved over here, and Arabs from certain villages and moved either to other places. And the tragedy for Palestinians is that after those displacements, when they happen, no one was able to actually create for them a continuous, ongoing, sustainable reality. Egypt did not annex Gaza, and therefore they were kind of stuck in that status. And that's how I would refer to the word indigenous. So I think that many times in America, people are trying to take models, or in Europe, that happen in America or in Europe, in other places, and applying those models on our story over here. And that doesn't necessarily work. There are some similarities when you're looking at issues of discrimination and such, but as a story, I wouldn't take a comparison, because it's just a complete different story that happened over here.
I want to highlight that we have some students here. Put you on the spot, Ella and Jasmine. We have some MSU students and young people, and I feel like they're a lot of them are right in the storm of this time, if you don't feel that way. And we also have a high schooler, Cam. I don't know if you have any questions. But any questions from you guys? And then we have more, but I just want to make sure that, yeah. No.
I have a question.
Okay, we had first, I think, Beth, and then we'll go back and forth between online and in person.
I couldn't hear Cora. If there was a question, I didn't hear it.
No question yet.
I'm coming a little close. Can you, Michael, can you hear me?
Yes?
Okay, like, you started to talk about the Sunni versus Shia sectarian stuff, and sounds especially brutal in Yemen and larger forces in the region. I'm wondering how that plays out in Gaza and how that complicates peace efforts.
Okay, that's a great question. So I'll just, in order for people to understand the question, because it's an important one, Sunni and Shia, without details, are the biggest division and the deadliest conflict of the Middle East by far. So there are two different religions with a history between themselves. And to give you an idea, when we're looking at the conflict, Iran and Iraq, historically, about 1 million people were killed under a Sunni Shia division. Syria, civil war, 600,000 people were killed in what you can look at as Sunni Shia conflict. 15% of the Muslim world is Shiite, 85% is Sunni. So in any conflict that you look at, you always want to see, is it a Sunni Shia? Is it a religious division? All Palestinians are Sunni, right? But even though I just described an historical ongoing conflict between Sunnis and Shiites also know how to cooperate if there is a common interest. So if you're looking in Gaza Strip, Hamas did get support from Iran, which is Shiite. And in Gaza, there's also another organization that I never got into describing called Islamic Jihad, which gets its support from Iran. So Iran, which is this Shiite giant, is supporting Hamas. Now, how come? If Iran believes that there should not be any states, Israel needs to be dismantled. And when they say they don't believe in any state, they also don't believe ideologically in a Palestinian state. In every speech that you see by Iranians, you'll always see free Palestine and all, but never say form a Palestinian state. They believe in what you call regional hegemony, which will control the region and Palestinians, but not necessarily allow a Palestinian state. So in the Iranian ideology, there's no acceptance of a Palestinian state. Hamas calls for a Palestinian state, Islamic, between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean. And therefore, there is a gap of intentions. But why do you have such a close cooperation? And people will argue, is it that close? Because most likely that Hamas now is blaming Iran for betraying them and not joining full speed into the current situation. Because Hamas, even though wanting a Palestinian state with the Jordan River and the Mediterranean, which means no Israel whatsoever, understand that most likely that's not going to happen tomorrow morning. It's a long-run operation, right? They're playing chess. And therefore, since it's not going to happen tomorrow morning, in the meanwhile, they can use Iran, which has the ability of dismantling Israel and weakening Israel. Iran, which calls to regional hegemony, to a caliphate, understand it's most likely not going to happen tomorrow morning. So in the meanwhile, you can use the Palestinians, which are a tool for dismantling, weakening Israel. And by the way, also uniting the world and the Arab Muslim world against Israel because of those kind of sentiments. So you're looking at Iran and Hamas taking advantage of one another in spite of them being Sunni and Shia. But your question is important because you understand that there is a base over there for future conflict between the two if there would not have been an Israel. I hope that is clear. And as for Sunni and Shia, just regarding your comment, Cora, you're right in the importance of Yemen. It is not necessarily that Yemen is so powerful, but in Yemen, you've got two bodies operating. The Shiites are completely sponsored by Iran. The Sunnis are sponsored by Saudi Arabia. So you're looking at an Iranian-Saudi ongoing war on Yemen soil in an area which is with a lot of geographic influence. I hope I answered your question regarding the Sunna Shia.
One more from the chat.
Sure.
Oh, okay. So someone in the chat asked if you can speak about the demonstrations of the last month leading up to October 7th and explain a little what's the background, what happened, what was protested against, and what these people who were on the streets then are thinking now.
So yeah, until last summer, if you would ask me to talk about Israel, I would be talking about one topic, which at the time I thought was very important, and right now looks like far history, and it was what was considered the judicial reform. There was a big debate in Israel about, without now going into detail into it, because that would require another hour, but within a few seconds, what should be the role and the balance power between the Supreme Court and the elected parliament. And Israel people were divided. Now, if you're listening to what I'm saying right now, it sounds like, really, did Israelis really divide themselves harshly about an actual structure between the Supreme Court and the parliament? But that was a facade of a greater discussion that Israelis were actually having for the past year of what kind of Israel will Israel be. We have a lot of tension. I'm ignoring right now Palestinian and the conflict. We have tension within Israel between religion and state, to an extent that we are wondering what does it actually mean to have a Jewish state? What is the relationship between the word Jewish and state? And those are debates that are very healthy and important, that maybe in the Israel history, constantly having conflicts, we actually never slow down to discuss what kind of society do we want to have over here? What does it actually mean, democracy? Now, people know about parliamentary democracy, presidential democracy, and other the Jewish democracy. How does it actually function? So we could go into that debate, which is fascinating because it goes into the soul of Israeli identity and how do we understand ourselves as people. But actually it did divide the country into at least half, or into a few camps. Into that, we've got a character called Netanyahu, which I won't say right now in favor or not in favor, but he's a very strong figure where no one is indifferent towards him. Either you love him or you hate him. Very few people will tell you, yeah, he's fine. You don't hear that. So that was a very divisive situation. And it was interesting where that is going, to what direction that is going. We had ongoing elections recently. The division in the country was dangerous because our enemies looked at us being divided and thought maybe that's an opportunity. Now, all along, actually, we believed that they're not going to attack us during those protests and such, because we know ourselves Israelis. If you would ask me in the summer, what would happen if you have a massive attack on Israel? I would tell you we are going to unite in a second, because external enemies unite you right away. And that is what happened. Now, that's very sad that we need to be united with an external enemy. But ever since October 7th, the conversation about judicial reform is irrelevant. Most likely, by the way, towards the end of the war, at some point, Israel will have to go to new elections. Left and right are being redefined in Israel. And I don't see the story about judicial reform becoming relative in the near future. Once again, who knows? But no one cares about it right now. A bit more power to the Supreme Court, less power to the Supreme Court. We are very united right now. There's little discussion of right and left. Israelis are all psychologically and physically affected by October 7th. And we are all determined that we need to do two things. One, bring back those hostages. We have right now still 136 hostages over there. All of us know someone. A student of mine, just for example, a student of mine that I was teaching 5 years ago, without a hand, because he lost his hand with a grenade, was taken into captivity. My neighbor over here, 2 of her nephews are in captivity. And in circles over here, we know people. And the second thing is, for us to be able to live over here, we need to make sure that on October 7th will not happen again. Just happen right outside over here. And for that, Israelis are determined to remove Hamas or change the reality where Hamas can perform such an attack. I'll just say it is going to be very difficult, because Hamas is not only an organization, it is school of thought, it is hospital, it's education, it is so much. And how do you actually do that? In what cost? in what cost. But Israelis are determined to change the reality on the ground, and we'll see what happens. That was I know that I went a bit beyond the actual question. What other questions do we have?
We'll do one more, Michael, and then, yeah, we can, everyone will know how to get in touch with you, or I'll be able to filter some questions to you, but.
I just need a bit louder, Cora. I can't hear.
Okay, one more, okay, I'll repeat it, or you can just. Okay. So my question is about the other Arab countries. I know the US probably has a reputation for not getting a lot of international news. And Hamas's attack came right before Saudi Arabia signed the Abraham Accord. What do you hear from like the UAE, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia? Is it radio silence from the other Arab countries?
Okay, great. So first of all, the Arab countries, especially those that you mentioned, like the Emirates, Bahrain, and Saudi Arabia, and I will say Egypt and Jordan, the governments are cooperating with Israel for years now, some of them openly as Abraham Accords, Emirates, Bahrain, and such, and some of them less openly, like Saudi Arabia. I'll quote, by the way, a king of one of those countries off the record, who said, Israel is like a mistress. Relationship is good. No one should know. So we have a warm relationship with those countries. A lot of it is because anti-Iran pact, anti-Islamic Brotherhood pact, and rearranging the Middle East for the potential day after oil or dramatic changes. So we are working with those countries. All of them are afraid of Hamas. Saudi Arabia, Emirates are afraid that the Houthis, the Shiite Yemenites, will do to them what Hamas did to us. There is cooperation. The public, that's the regime, on the regime level. The public itself, Arab people, are being fed with information, mainly from one channel called Al Jazeera. Al Jazeera is by far, it's an Arab-speaking channel from Qatar, which is by far the most influential form of technology that is providing information with almost no competition. There is a Saudi channel, an Emirati channel, but Al Jazeera by far. And it is completely shaping how people think. That shows you how much Qatar is influential. And this is a voice of the Islamic Brotherhood, which is aligned with Hamas at the same time. So you've got a huge problem right now that the public of the Arab world is fed by a channel called Al Jazeera. And if you heard Al Jazeera in English, in order to understand what Al Jazeera is, it's two different things. Al Jazeera in Arabic is directed for Arabs. Al Jazeera in English is directed to you. And Al Jazeera is very important. So I will say when we're looking today at threats to the Middle East, so you've got Iran, but you also have Qatar, which is also the mediator, but also the one that is actually managing to feed ideas into the Arab-speaking public. And that is very much important. And as for international news and America, it is true. There is a frustration and criticism of us Middle Eastern people that you're not paying attention as a public to Yemen or issues of Ethiopia or to what happened in Syria throughout the years. People suddenly were aware of what happened in the Russian-Ukrainian war. People now, because Israel is involved, are looking in. And I think that Cora said it at the beginning. Where was everyone when hundreds of thousands of people were being killed in other places? People are looking on us very narrowly over here. So that's a bit about where the Arab countries are in a nutshell, and a bit about the access. And I will just say, you're probably aware that most people are getting their information through social media, which is usually a headline, one line, a picture. And how could you do any justice to any story with a picture, 2 pictures, or 10 pictures? I can tell you that I talked to you now an hour, and I am frustrated because I feel that we still did not talk about so many different things that will explain the reality on the ground over here. I mean, some people ask me judicial reform in Yemen and Saudi and Al Jazeera, and we try to put it all into some sense. How do you actually make justice where most people know a sentence, a picture, and believe that they understand a reality according to that? And that is something which is troubling.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Michael. Really, really grateful for your time. I don't know if you want to end with anything looking forward. I know when we talked recently, you talked about it, and you said it tonight, how there's also that Israel has changed. The Israel you knew before October 7th is a different place. The fear, the sadness, the trauma, the hopelessness that is natural, obviously, after something like this. But I'm wondering if there's anything that you want to end with. Where can we direct our attention, our support? Where can we apply pressure to, obviously, things like the Abraham Accords and widen peace, supporting potential collaborations on the ground there? Any sort of notes of, what we should pay attention to?
Yeah, so first of all, notes of hope. We need to hope that we will manage, in spite of everything that happened, to eventually have a peace agreement with Saudi Arabia and to find those alliances and connections with countries that have a common interest like us. That will be very important. And I'll just say, to the group over here, check your sources. There's a lot of fake news out there. There's a lot of misinformation. I'm seeing things that I'm on the ground being brought into the media that are just not the case. So just check your sources very, very well, and be careful from headlines, from very, very fast conclusions, and trying to put the American model into the Middle East. So Israel is like this, or Israel is like that, or we need to give respect to both us Israelis and Palestinians, that if we are for so long in conflict, apparently there's more complexity here on the ground than anything else. So I will say respect to complexity, and check the resources, and try and listen to think tanks, and listen to the news after they happen and not as they're happening, because usually when people are broadcasting while an event is still running, there's a lot of misinformation.
Thank you. We saw the impact of that one headline that was spread everywhere, that Israel had attacked the hospital. And that set off a firestorm, and that was false, right? So that was a very good example of, and we're still dealing with the repercussions, right? So.
The same thing happened with the school.
Oh, yeah.
When there's a kid.
Yeah. Yep. A lot of it. So thank you again, and we'll definitely keep in touch. And you'll let us know when you're in the U.S., and we'll come see you when we come to Israel. Thank you, Michael. All right. I know.
Oh, we got